All right, good morning and good evening. Thank you for joining our webinar on Cyprus and COVID-19. My name is John Dykes from Hasna, Inc., a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit that works to build peace between divided communities in and around Turkey, including Cyprus, the topic of our conversation today. So we're broadcasting live on YouTube. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature here at the bottom of your screen. I'll try to leave somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes at the end of the conversation to address all of your questions. So let me introduce our panelists. We're joined by Mr. Mete Hatay, who is a senior research consultant at the PRIO Cyprus Centre, which is an independent bicommunal research institute committed to research and dialogue. Mr. Hatay has worn many hats over his career, been a political analyst, journalist, author, academic, mainly focusing on the Cyprus conflict, Cypriot cultural history, immigration, Islam, and ethnic and religious minorities. We are also joined by Andromachi, Sophocleous, and Kemal Baykallı from UniteCyprusNow, which is a multi-communal grassroots initiative that promotes actions in support of peace and the reunification of Cyprus. They aim to connect Cyprus by seeking the truth, building empathy, respecting diversity, reinforcing solidarity, and promoting a joint future. UniteCyprusNow lobbies, campaigns, and takes various forms of direct action to create awareness, empowerment, and mobilization among all Cypriots. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, so Cyprus is a unique case when it comes to handling the coronavirus pandemic. As many of you know, without going into too much detail, Cyprus has been divided by its Turkish north and Greek south since 1974. The conflict that resulted in this division of the island has become frozen, and a buffer zone manned by the United Nations now divides the island in two. Over the years, there have been many attempts by many actors to resolve the conflict, but none have been too successful. So that leads me up to my first question, and I will direct this towards you, Mr. Hatay. So with the most recent peace negotiations between the North and South ending in July 2017, ending with no result, can you give us a little bit of a background on these negotiations, perhaps why they collapsed? And possibly inform us about the future or the present. What is the state of negotiations, informal and formal?
Yeah, I mean, it was the repetition of the previous attempts in a way. This like every 6-7 years, one eager United Nations official comes to Cyprus and feels that he can solve the Cyprus problem in a short period of time, and actually the Cypriots give him the impression, or her the impression, that they are willing to solve the Cyprus problem, and it ends up as a very hectic 1 or 2 years, and at the end of his time or the negotiations, we end up with nothing. So I find most of the time the actual method which has been employed to solve the Cyprus problem can be the key problem to solve the Cyprus problem. Because of this Big Bang solution attempts, like comprehensive settlement attempts, you pile everything and you postpone every issue to a sort of a big wholesome agreement, yeah? And under the principle of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So you don't have to agree on anything, or you postpone your agreements until the end. So that means that you freeze most of the conflicts that you could solve meantime while you're negotiating, but you postpone them and they become a bargaining chip within the comprehensive settlement framework. Yeah, and usually we end up with a failure. We are so close. There's only two articles left to be agreed and everything, or 95% has been agreed, but the 5% is not agreed, but nothing everything has to be agreed to agree on the solution, and usually we end up with nothing. So nothing is agreed until everything is agreed equals nothing is agreed at the end of the negotiation. So interestingly, we have been making these mistakes since 1968, actually, Beirut talks. So I suggest that for the future, and actually the Secretary General as well started hinting some sort of steps to be taken before the actual solution is agreed. So in a way, is a slight move from this comprehensive, but more piecemeal, step by step, or evolutionary approach to solve the problem in that sense. So also to build confidence while you doing the agreement talks. Yeah. So that they've been insisting for the last couple of years insisting the leaders to show some gestures or steps should be taken, confidence building measures should be implemented to show the other side you want to. Because usually one of the questions at the end of these failures, like De Soto was saying, Cypriots have to do this soul searching again. Mr. Downer was saying you can teach parrot, yeah, this bird who talks, to say I want solution. So there's also lack of confidence from the international community in Cypriots to solve the Cyprus problem. Apart from sometime, as I say, there are certain diplomats or more volunteered people, like in the last time it was Mr. Ade, who was so enthusiastic to solve the Cyprus problem, can be in a way manipulated by the Cypriot bad intentions in this sense, and end up with a failure at the end of the day after a big show. So what was the biggest problem? Actually, there wasn't any problem. If you look at it, until the last moment, we thought that they were agreed almost on everything. Yeah. And this is how they presented things. But what we realized afterwards, that they were negotiating. They were saying to each other, it's a good idea. Let's put aside and we discuss it at the end. Let's put aside and we discuss it at the end. When the end come in which city was it, Kemal? In last day
Montana.
In Montana. So the Secretary General drafted 4 principles and put in front of them in a way, like Turkey has to change the guarantorship, the status of the guarantorship, and the Greek Cypriots have to accept whether to have Turkey to have a military presence in the island, like 500 soldiers, or the guarantorship. Yeah, this was the choices put in front of Mr. Anastasiadis, and also the Turkish Cypriots was insisting on this rotating presidency and everything. So it doesn't look like a very big thing, but knowing the actual papers that they've been working on, the overlaps, the convergence papers they call it, there were a lot of blue and red, and the black, it becomes black when you agree, yeah? But when you look at the prints, it was a lot of blue and red still there. They didn't discuss the property issue. They didn't discuss and they jumped over it, and they put the coach in front of the horses in a way, yeah? By bringing the other countries in as well, the guarantor powers and everything. Like you have all these details to work on. They didn't work on the details, and the leaders moved to bring the guarantors in, and also European Union in, and everybody. And we had this non-fruitful process at the end of the day. So I'm a little bit cynical towards this. Sorry to say that, but we have to be more frank with the Cyprus problem, because it has become a way of life, and also we learn a lot of tricks and tactics to manipulate the situation. So that was the summary of my perception of the last process in a way.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for that background. So I'll move on to our second question. I'll direct this towards you, Andromachi. So the buffer zone crossing points have been opened in Cyprus since 2003, but now with the COVID crisis, some of them have been closed, and many have said that this has been without bicommunal cooperation or coordination or very unilateral. I was wondering if you could sort of discuss how important these open crossing checkpoints are for Cypriots in everyday life, and what does their closure mean?
I think the opening of crossing points in 2000 was a landmark in the modern history of Cyprus. I have spent half of my life with the crossing points closed and half of my life with the crossing points open. So, you know, my perception might be a bit different, but in a nutshell, when it comes to the Cyprus history, 1960 was the Republic of Cyprus created, the state collapsed. Between 1963 and 1974, the Turkish Cypriots were basically living in enclaves. They were isolated, they withdrew from the government, so they were fully isolated. 1974, there was the coup d'etat by Greece. Then there was the Turkish invasion in 1974, and since then, the crossing points were all closed. This meant that many people, both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, thousands of people actually, they were refugees in their own country. They had to move. They had to move from their homes. And this created a de facto situation in which basically people were growing up, and people like me were growing up in a divided island, in an island in which you were growing up with perceptions of the other as being the demon, as being the, you know, as being that monster. And that was, I mean, that was the dominant perception in both sides, in both the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot side. In the years of the division, this has been perpetuated by, you know, a nationalistic sort of educational system, especially in the Greek Cypriot community, that kind of creates and enhances this picture of the other. And then suddenly in 2003, after years of demonstrations by the Turkish Cypriots, which were again a very important landmark in the history of Cyprus, in the modern history, because they demonstrated basically against their own leader. And when the crossing points were opened in 2003, people had the opportunity to go back to their homes. People had the opportunity to visit their homes. And then people had the opportunity to meet each other. They had the opportunity to understand that this other that they had created as a monster in their minds was, it was not, I mean, it was not the picture. I mean, it wasn't what they thought it was. There were impressive and very heartwarming stories of people and of people coming together, sharing their stories. And, you know, it was the first time that there was a realization that this island has suffered, and both the people of the island have all suffered, and they were meeting. It was a huge thing. And for me, who my father is a refugee, for instance, and so I could see his difficulty returning back to his home, and it was very difficult for him. And actually, it has been much easier for me as a person that has been growing up without the memories of the past to visit the north and to regain memories and to recreate memories in the north. And the opening of crossing points has been incredibly useful in bringing the people together, in creating these sort of linkages again, those linkages that had broken down from 1963 onwards, basically. You know, we have been a divided island since 1963. The United Nations have been on the island since 1964. And then suddenly, for the past 17 years, we basically had the opportunity to meet each other, to live together, to share experiences, to put each other as part of our lives. Having said that, it's clear that it's not everybody that have done this. I mean, there are many people that are still sort of tormented, let's say, by the trauma of the past and by those the memories of what they've gone through, that they have refused to engage with the other side. But nobody can challenge, and all the survey polls have shown that the more the contact between the people, the more the stereotypes that are created about each other, they come down, and the greater the prospect of us being able to live together. You know, what Mete was discussing before, and he was discussing all the problems about the negotiation process. One of the major problems in the negotiation problems is that basically in the negotiation process is that the people are absent from it. The people do not even know what we are negotiating. We have agreed on a bizonal bicommunal federation, and we have not, and people do not know what this federation is. They know what this federation entails. And the same goes when it comes to, you know, meeting the other, understanding the other community, empathizing with the other community. And the crossing points have assisted to that end. Obviously, the crossing points are not the solution. The crossing points are just, you know, that stepping stone that will make things easier for us to go to a solution. However, nobody can challenge that the crossing points have created a state in the country that has brought people together. Friendships have been created. There are people who cannot imagine their lives without the other part of the country. And these are the people that are the ones that are willing to basically fight for a united country, because how can you expect your people to embrace a solution and to embrace a united island if they do not know the other, if they do not work with the other, if they have not coexisted? And as we have been divided since 1963, at least the opening of the crossing points have allowed us to work on us coming together again. And the closure of the crossing points has been a very stark, sort of reminder that this situation is so unstable that at any point it can go away. We were discussing many times with people in the UniteCyprusNow group that even before the closure of crossing points, that we were afraid that this pseudo-normality in which we live will one day, you know, just collapse. And this is what happened with the closure of crossing points. We came to this realization that, you know, this status quo, it is not sustainable. It is not something that can ensure our future. And for us, being members of the UniteCyprusNow group, it was yet another reminder that we need to push harder for a solution, because as long as we do not manage to reach a final solution, we will be at any point prey and subject to the instability and to anything that might happen in the world that will be affecting the island.
All right. Yeah, well, thank you for that. It seems like it's had a big impact, especially sort of on the psyche of the island in general, the closure of the crossing points. So move on to another question, this time for you, Kemal. So in general, do you think that Cyprus has been able to use COVID as an opportunity in any way to sort of foster bicommunal cooperation or ignite interest again in reconciliation? Or do you think, once again, as we've seen in the past, that it could be seen as yet another missed opportunity? Oh, Kemal, I think you're muted.
Yes. For the cooperation to take place, you need at least three things. One, a reason why you should cooperate, a motivation. Number two, I think you need structures, the tools to be able to cooperate. And three, the willingness of the sides to cooperate. I think there was a reason, a very valid reason to cooperate. The entire world has been going on two separate trends. On one hand, they were just closing up, but on the same time, they were trying to cooperate because this was a global issue. So I think we had a valid reason to cooperate. Number two, willingness. I think that was something that was missing, in the sense that everybody was so frightened and everybody was sticking on something that are familiar to them. And unfortunately, bicommunal cooperation is not necessarily familiar to them. They were familiar with their own structures, with their own administrations, with their own with their own rulers, but they're not very much familiar with the bicommunal cooperation, really. I'm talking about the mainstream. And number three, the structures. The only thing we had was a technical committee. The entire establishment on the island is designed in a way that one side tries to exclude and corner the other side. So a lot of animosity rather than tools to cooperate. So in this environment, what happened was, of course, lack of cooperation happened instead of cooperation. Of course, we also need to understand that there is this formal track, the formal structures which are designed with official politics or non-recognition. I don't talk to you, I don't recognize you, you're a puppet regime, you're pseudo-state, and all these kind of arguments are taking place. But on the other hand, on the ground, since 2003, there has been an organic life, which is rather outside of this, these formal structures, because formal structures are designed to exclude, but this organic life, people going and then having a drink with their friends, they're working on the other side, there are mixed marriages, there are couples, there are daily trips, there are economic activities, there are shopping. So, and these are not necessarily endorsed or accepted. So in a way, eventually, the fear has dominated, and even the people who have been advocating opening new crossings, I found them at the peak of the crisis. They were just saying, close everything, close the airports, close the doors. So when you don't have this background to cooperate, this is just another example why what happens. In fact, how we see it, how I see it, we are really vulnerable to global crisis. This is just one, but there could be other things. And Cyprus is a very small island, and then we forget this fact.
All right. Well, thank you. So yeah, sort of so involving that question, you talked briefly about the technical committees. And so I know that the Bicommunal Technical Committee on Health met in early February to address the coronavirus. And I'll direct this towards you, Mr. Hatay. So sort of involving this, what sort of access is there to medical supplies and livelihood assistance on both sides of the island in terms of the vulnerable populations, refugees, poor, people with disabilities, and in relation to the bicommunal technical committees, what has been done, and has there been any cooperation?
Yes, now I turn the thing on. Yes, there has been some cooperation, not enough, but there has been some made it to the news press, some didn't, but there have been a lot of helping each other through the technical committees. Technical committees actually have been meeting regularly, arranging, for example, sick people to be taken to the other side, from one side to the other side, people arriving from different countries to the wrong ports, and they have to be sort of taken to the other side again. All these committees and United Nations was quite able to help them in that sense. They were keen to help them. But when the COVID started, it was interesting actually. We were demonstrating of the closure of the checkpoint. Nikos Anastasiadis closed, claiming that the Turkish Cypriot side is not under any observation internationally. So in order to keep Cyprus more hygienic, they have to. He wanted to close the most busiest street, allowing both sides to meet regularly, Lokmachi and the Letra Street. Of course, the intention wasn't just the COVID. It was in a way like not punishment, but to show, sometimes leaders have to show that they have the power. They can close and open certain things. And we were protesting against it. Both sides, the Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, were protesting against it. But actually, Mr. Anastasiadis without knowing, did a big favor for Turkish Cypriots in that sense, that 1 week before the not outbreak, but the incidences, the traffic was stopped between both sides. So this intense interaction was helped. So that in a way caused not of the infected people to cross. Not the Greek Cypriot side had many, but if there was any amongst tourists and everything, and all these touristic areas was kept safe from this interaction. Of course, as I say, it wasn't intentional, but it ended up that way. But when the first incident happened in Cyprus, in the north, with the German tourists, there was a huge panic with the people. When we looked at the readiness of the health sort of infrastructure, we had 750 test kits, to the PCR test kits, which is very, very important to test the people and know who has the disease or not. We had only 16 available ventilator. So if there was any outbreak, we would have had big problems. So intensive care units was not enough. Specialized people on this kind of pandemic wasn't there. We had only 4 people knowing what to do about the pandemic. So it was, of course, huge panic amongst the people. So the people, that panic helped people to stay in at home. The other reason for them to stay at home easily in the north was, as we know, the north side, we have a lot of government employees. A lot of people get checks from the government and everything. So 80,000 checks, we're talking about 220,000 TRNC citizens. Out of this, 80,000 of them get checks from the government. So it was easy for them not to go to work and stay at home. So this lockdown measures were taken very easily. And also the negatively, of course, Turkish Cypriots immediately encouraged most of their foreign workers to get on the boats and go to Turkey. 56,000 people left in 1 month, including foreign students and workers. Almost 40% of the labor force in Cyprus are foreign workers, mainly from Turkey, 40,000 from Turkey, 17,000 from third countries like Pakistan, African countries, India, increasingly more Turkomans from Turkmenistan and people like that. So most of the Turks left, and we ended up with third country citizens who were punished during the pandemic by the government by not allocating any aid, not a single penny. They have been immediately put out of job. And these people were left there in this foreign country without an embassy, without an international aid office, nobody. And the government said, whoever brought them to Cyprus should take care of them. I have nothing to do with them. Can you imagine? The prime minister used these sentences just like that openly. So immediately, of course, the civil society, the press and everything made a lot of noise and everything. And they arranged them 1,500 Turkish lira each. How much is that in dollars now? $200 per month, per 2 months, actually. Is it per month or per 2 months? $200, yeah, were allocated to them. So all the private sector workers ended up with $200 each. 43,000 of them had this much money. Civil servants' salaries were cut into half as well. The economy stopped immediately. Of course, the tourism, the university sector, we have 100,000 students from abroad studying in North. So the universities stopped. Most of the Turkish students immediately left to Turkey. We ended up with 40,000 foreign students, majority from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and places like Senegal. 30 different locations in Africa. So they also had problems. They couldn't receive money because their countries are in trouble because of the pandemic. So they ended up without money, without work, only with the supply of aid from the universities and places like that. But some of them were already dropouts from the system because they finished the university, but they couldn't leave, or they were dropped out from the university, but they were still hanging around and working in informal sectors. So we had almost 5,000 former students. They didn't get any aid from the universities because they were not students anymore, but they didn't get any aid from the government because they were not official workers. They ended up there, invisible, somewhere, hiding. We tried to collect some help for them. The student association sort of identified their places and addresses, and so the Voice Association, they helped a little bit, but a lot of them suffered. A lot of them was, fearful. They were locked in their houses. They didn't know what to do. They didn't have even food to eat. But we didn't have, thank God, we didn't have any big major crisis. You expect from these people who are hungry to go around and start sort of hustling for food. Yeah, we didn't have that either, thankfully. So we didn't have any kind of uprisings, riots and everything, but a lot of people like this silently been mistreated by the authorities in the north. So during these 2 months, the aid from Turkey hasn't come. There wasn't any financial or medical aid coming from Turkey. Only last month they sent some gloves without powder, they called it. I don't know if they're expensive or cheap. Some masks and some protection gear, but cheap ones, like no test kits, no ventilators. These are the actual urgency that the people need for preparation for the COVID-19 pandemic. They didn't come. Thank God, the European Union shifted 5 million of the budget which was spared for Turkish Cypriots. 30 million euro was spared for Turkish Cypriots, according to the since 2004, because we said yes to European Union accession and whatever. They've been sending some aid to Turkish Cypriots to develop the small businesses, transform the civil society, and so on and so forth. So they used 5 million of that money for by purchasing medical aid. So we received 25 ventilator. We need about 150 ventilator for the whole North Cyprus. And now currently we have 110, I think, and more are arriving with donations and things like that. Test kits have increased, the numbers have increased. I think we have 5,000 PCR kits now in our hands, and also these rapid tests that they use, because they've been the numbers every day increasing test wise. We have like 1,000 people tested every day now, so that means that they have this rapid test a lot. With the collaboration also, Mr. Akıncı asked the medical organization, what do you need, what else do you need? And they said also this medicine, what do you call it, chlorophyll? Yeah. And the chloroquine, yeah, they have a factory in the south making this. So Mr. Anastasiadis was kind enough to send some chloroquine to North. I don't know how much, and I think it's enough at the moment for the urgent needs. So apart from that, there were some protection gears as well received. But European Union was the only country without, of course, supplying extra budget, but using the existing budget to transfer certain segments of this budget to fight against COVID-19. Instead of, for example, spending money on art or whatever, they moved that budget to the fight against COVID-19. Interestingly, I think the World Health Organization, I don't know if they had any connection with Turkish Cypriots. It hasn't appeared on TV. Mr. Akıncı has written to them, as far as I know. There wasn't any reply. We are not appearing on any of the statistics in the world, even though we have been, you know, unpredictably successful in the fight against COVID. So we don't exist in the COVID statistics. So the COVID statistics are wrong because the North Cyprus is not part of it there. So we have 108 people who were infected. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you for that. I'm gonna sort of shift focus a little bit. And I guess I'll address this towards you, Kemal. So given the added complication of coronavirus, I know that the local elections in the north of Cyprus were postponed. But politically, domestically, what can sort of be done by either the political leaders in both the north and the south or the public to sort of steer towards a peaceful settlement?
I think first thing is to get over this fear. Everybody's traumatized, just like in the world. I think people, okay, they have these political expectations, they have their political motivations, but not many people were in the situation to think about politics, except the politicians maybe. And that was one of the reactions in the early stages, because everybody, the politicians were trying to take part in it and trying to show off a little bit for, as the champions of the saviors of their communities. And people reacted when they felt that the motivation is not necessarily to do something, but rather to get political points. There are two different systems in the north and in the south. In the south, there's a presidential system, and in the north, it's a parliamentary system. But because North Cyprus is not internationally recognized, there is the status that the leader, the president of the country, is recognized also as the interlocutor. So when it comes to bicommunal cooperation, when it comes to solution process, one thing which is required, especially in the north, is the cooperation of the cabinet with the president, which is according to the constitution, the powers are quite limited because it's a parliamentary system. So there is a drift, a shift, there is a disagreement between the cabinet and the president in the north. This is something that we need to underline, because their fault lines are different. I mean, the cabinet is very skeptical about the talks about the federal solution. It's a right-wing coalition. And okay, one of the parties do not claim to be right-wing, but this is how they're portrayed. And the leader of the Turkish Cypriots, the president, has been very committed to solution, to a federal solution. In fact, this is even accepted by pro-solution forces within the Greek Cypriot community. So there is this clash between these sides, and this needs to overcome. This can only overcome when the president, the leader, uses its power with the recognition coming from the international community. Number two, the people also needs to demonstrate their support to their president, to their leader, so that he can actually continue performing towards this direction. Whenever there is a lack of progress in the Cyprus talks, the left wing in the Turkish Cypriot community or pro-solution forces loses their grip, loses their power. And this is also true for Mr. Akıncı. Especially after the failure in Crans-Montana, he lost his ability to exert power within the Turkish Cypriot community, but also towards Turkey, because we also know that he is not at very good terms with Turkey. And then without having Turkey on board, it is not really easy to sustain a peace process. And Akıncı, feeling betrayed by his partner, by the Greek Cypriot leader, I'm not getting into whose fault it is or not, but he feels that way. He found himself stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, he cannot cooperate with his counterpart, with the Greek Cypriot leader. And on the other hand, he finds himself not being taken seriously by Turkey, in the sense that he used his trump cards until Crans-Montana. He has taken initiatives which is sometimes not even approved by Turkey. So he found himself in a difficult situation. Talking about the civil society, I think this is also one of the problems. We have unlimited number of associations. I'm sure Mete Hatay will agree with me on that as well. But in real terms, I think the grassroots movement, the civil society, is not as strong as everybody thinks, and their ability to push the decision makers towards that direction is also limited. So what to do? One, I think we need international support. We need the internationals to remind Cypriots that Cyprus problem is a global problem. It's a regional problem, at least. And we cannot be left to the mercy of the Cypriots alone. I'm not saying that they have the right to decide on behalf of us, but they have to remind us that it's our obligation and responsibility to solve our problem, because it has the risk to create even a bigger problem. We expect the European Union member states particularly to play a role, because everybody, when they're talking about the EU, people talk about EU as if it's a unilateral, one unique unit, which is not necessarily the case. We need the leading institution and leading members to encourage Cypriots, and especially the Greek Cypriot leadership, because they are the members of they have the say in those seats. They're taking part. That this cannot be sustained. Unfortunately, media is not very helpful. I don't want to be in a form to accuse one side or another, but I think, my honest opinion, I find Greek Cypriot media even more difficult to deal with. And I don't know what Andromachi will say this. So this is also not helping. We have the social media, which is, I'm very hopeful about the fact that there are those new generation of Cypriots who are more pro-Cypriot, more pro-solution, less inclined in politics as we know, but more inclined to get together and cooperate. Things that matter to us, to them, are not necessarily always covered with the political area. To sum up, I think what needs to be done, especially in the Turkish Cypriot community at this stage, is to get rid of this fear, and hopefully we'll be getting into this election phase soon. It's postponed to October, if I'm not mistaken. And there are discussions whether it is constitutionally okay or not. And this is also being challenged, because this is the first time that we have experienced such a case. But we are hoping that Turkish Cypriots vote for a pro-solution, pro-federal solution leader again, so that maybe we can reignite the talks.
All right. So yeah, we have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll try to get to a few of our Q&A questions. But just sort of to wrap up and to follow up on Kemal's point about the Cyprus issue being a global issue. So right now, our audience comes from multiple different regions: Turkey, the European Union, here in the United States in Washington, D.C., and they might be working in coordinating peace efforts, working with humanitarian agencies, think tanks, and so on. So, Andromachi, in your opinion, what can people do that are not in Cyprus to help sort of bring attention to the issue, or to somehow help to, bring a resolution?
Well, in all honesty, I need to be honest in this. I believe that this will needs to start from Cypriots. I mean, unless the Cypriots ourselves, we understand that there is a problem in our country that we need to solve, and that we need to find a way to solve it. I believe that we should not, rely on external powers in order for the solution. I really believe that what is missing is the understanding by Cypriots, and especially even by young Cypriots, to engage with the issue and to understand that there is an issue that needs to be solved. There is this perception of a pseudo normality on the island, of a pseudo peace. We think that the status quo, because there is no war at the moment, we are kind of laid back and think that, okay, we're fine, nothing happens, there is no tension, there is no war taking place, and this creates a setting in which we become ignorant, we become not willing to act, we become sort of we just do not care about the Cyprus problem. Having said this, I believe that the lack of interest in the Cyprus problem is clearly an issue that is also perpetuated by the fact that the politicians have been using the Cyprus problem as a way for them to remain relevant. And this has created a setting in which basically the Cyprus problem is absolutely boring. People hear people discussing the Cyprus and they switch off. They feel that there is, they feel that there is nothing for them to discuss, because it is the constant rhetoric in the words of politicians, that they use, these slogans and this pseudo-patriotism in order to basically remain relevant. However, we need to get our grasp together and realize that there is a problem in the country and sort of work towards solving it. Having said that, though, international civil society organizations are important. It is important that they engage with the civil society organizations on the island that work for a solution. We need to make the Cyprus problem relevant in the 2020s. This is, the Cyprus problem has gone from so many various phases, as we said before. I mean, the United Nations have been on the island since 1964. And it has, there are so many perceptions and differing perceptions about the Cyprus problem. We need to make it relevant about what it is today and about what the issues are today that we are facing. And I really believe that like your organization, I mean, this is a great opportunity for us to sort of discuss our concerns, our perceptions on the issue. And I would say that the most important thing that there is to be done is for these organizations to engage with our, with the organizations that work on the island, because this is that work on the island for peace. Because having said that, it is important to stress that the organizations that work on peace on the island, just like Kemal said, it is not that we are not heard. It is that we are basically not considered as a pressure group. They don't care. They think that we are, a bunch of a bunch of people that just repeat what they think. And the politicians do not want to engage. The politicians do not want to understand or to engage with the civil society organizations on the island that work for peace. Having said that, there is a lot of prejudice against civil society organizations that work for peace. As Kemal said, especially in the Greek Cypriot community, there is a lot of hate, a lot of targeting, this perception that, you know, we are all getting millions from, I don't know, from random funds from abroad in order to push the solution on the island. And all these perceptions are exacerbated and perpetuated by mainstream media, in a sense. And it is very difficult to tackle, because you basically, you are called to prove that you are not an elephant. So the engagement of international civil society organizations with domestic civil society organizations will allow the peace working organizations in the country to gain that necessary leverage as well. And maybe through this attention from abroad, they will be heard more on the island as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so like leading in or taking from those comments, I'm going to go into a Q&A question that we have. And so it's been mentioned a few times about how the Cypriots themselves need to sort of come together as well and focus on the issue. This question comes from Rukmini Banerjee, and she says, with every generation, we're moving just a little further away from the origin of the conflict. Do you see any change in the mindset of the youth on the island? Are they more aligned with the peace process? So anyone
Andromachi is the youngest, maybe she should answer.
Is the youngest and the least hopeful on this front. Well, I must say there are many organizations, like there is the Bicommunal student organization, that it's students who are in the UK, and they came together and they created the first bicommunal organization that is between Cypriots, and not, you know, because for so many years the student organizations in the UK, the Greek Cypriots were mostly aligned with the Greek organizations, and the Turkish Cypriots were mostly aligned with the Turkish organizations, student organizations. And now for the first time, there is a bicommunal student organization in the UK. You've got the Cyprus Friendship Program that has done a lot of work in sort of bringing people up with, you know, with the perception of a united country. You've got the Imagine program on the island that is one of the most hopeful aspects of an organized of organization basically on the island. It's basically teachers that bring students together with a view to a united country. It's basically young kids that are brought up with the understanding of the other as incorporated in their own lives, and that is something very different from what we've known. Having said that, you know, when you study history, you get to understand that many times the traumas by people who have gone through a certain period, they are not as accentuated as when they are passed on to their kids or to their grandchildren. And this is something that we see particularly amongst the Greek Cypriot community. You see Greek Cypriots who bring with them basically a fallacy of the history of Cyprus. They bring with them only the understanding of what their community has gone through. They bring with them an understanding of only what their community has suffered. It is an understanding that is basically passed to them through a problematic educational system that only focuses on the pain of one side rather than taking the pain of the whole of the island. And this is problematic in the sense that people who went through the great tensions on the island, no matter what their perceptions were, they still knew the reality. You know, they still knew that to some extent both sides were perpetrators and victims at the same time, and at different sort of times in points in time on the island. But their children and their grandchildren, especially if they don't take the time to study the history of the country profoundly, they might well be brought up with an understanding only of their own traumas. And that is problematic because it creates this desire for vengeance that is passed on to kids. I must say that things are kind of polarized on the island now. There are young kids that are very eager and that they understand Cyprus as a whole, but at the same time there are many kids that understand Cyprus as finishing on the crossing points basically. And we need a lot of work in order to change perceptions that have been established for the past like 50 years. And the only thing, one of the things that makes me hopeful is that there is also a lot of ignorance. There is also a lot of people that, because they're sick and tired, young people, much younger than me, 18-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds, who, because they're sick and tired of the Cyprus problem, they are not, they don't necessarily have hatred towards the other, but they don't care. Those are the people that we need to work with. Those are the people that we need to, start approaching in order to creating this sense of empathy, creating a better understanding of our history as an island, creating a better understanding of what this island has gone through, and most importantly, getting over the need to accentuate our own pain. Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots and the other minorities on the island have been suffering for so many years at different points in time. And it is about time that we all get together and see what we have to do with our island. This understanding of us being Cypriots and sharing the same island and sharing all the different perils that we are faced with today. We are faced with environmental problems, we are faced with financial problems, we are faced with so many different issues that unless we as Cypriots get together and we decide to tackle in unity, this island will never prosper. And so the Cyprus problem appears to be yet another stumbling block that prevents Cypriots from basically getting their act together and looking at the other issues that in 2020 they have arisen before us, and we need to see what to do with them. And therefore, I believe that there are positive aspects, there are negative aspects, but the most important thing is that there is a lot of work to be done. And unless we are all prepared to work and we are all prepared to understand our duty in the face of our country, nothing will happen. And this solution that we speak about, it will never come from, I don't know, it will never arrive on the island with a magical power. Yeah.
Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left. So I guess just very briefly to answer one more question. So are there any so I know that UniteCyprusNow has been really active on social media and engaging in, different events like the Speak Your Language challenge to promote, language exchange between Turkish and Greek Cypriots. So we have a question: what other sort of innovative methods of activism and advocacy are happening right now in Cyprus? Yeah, like I said, we only have 2 minutes left, though.
Who's answering? Kemal or me? Or both?
I'll take 1 minute and I'll leave you 1 minute.
Okay. All right, Kemal, thank you.
Well, as UniteCyprusNow, we are organizing dialogue groups, and with this lockdown, we started organizing online dialogue groups. We are trying to bring people together who are not necessarily converted, who are not necessarily part of this discussion, who have never taken part in this discussion. And we just don't want to make things boring, because the problem is that I think we don't realize, as Andromachi said, how much Cyprus problem is touching our lives, on diversity, on environment, on our future, and on potential risks. So this is just one thing that we've been doing. Apart from UniteCyprusNow, we have different heads. We recently launched the first trilingual podcast station of Cyprus. It is called Island Talks. It is islandtalks.fm. So if anybody can log in and then find our programs there. It's just started a few days ago, and then we are promoting it. And maybe Mete will talk more about the fact that there are also music events that are bringing people together across the divide. divide. So I don't want to take his time. I just want to summarize here, finish it here.
Yes, I mean, as PRIO, we are a research institute. We do mainly research, but we do also, we have to have an outreach, what to do with this research that we're doing. Yeah. So we use different methods like films, documentaries. Recently, I just finished one documentary on the wall city Nicosia and artist sort of encounters that they have been sort of, as Kemal said before, organically meeting and creating this third space in the middle of the city, yeah, without talking about the mainstream politics and everything. So in a way, it's very interesting to study them and see them, what we can learn from these people, you know, to employ in reconciliation studies. And apart from that, it is very important to create third space in research and information as well. As Andromachi said, the press on both sides can be problematic in delivering the proper, unbiased, impartial information. And the authorities, they have their monopoly on the information. They want to control the information and have a monopoly. So in what we're doing is we work on different sensitive issues rather than, because usually the institutes coming from outside, as you know, PRIO is a Norwegian institute originally. We are just a branch of it in Nicosia. We instead of running away from sensitive issues, we decided to go for the sensitive issues and unfold them in a way, and study them, and also share these findings with people, and in order to revisit their prejudice with this new information. This is what we aim to do, preparing a fertile ground for proper discussions, in a sense, which is we still need discussions and debates on certain issues. But apart from that, there are a lot of other organic reconciliation goes on between the smugglers, between you know, different groups that you don't even think of. So they are not part of any of the official things, but they are doing well together. Even we have a bicommunal mafia functioning in the island. So there are a lot of bicommunal activities going on apart from the actual known ones. The structural problems have to be also overcome because in the island we have two states in a way. One is recognized, the other one is not recognized, but they are two states in states of exception. Yeah. One of them is the Republic of Cyprus, supposed to be a bicommunal republic functioning with one leg, because the other leg is left since '64. It's not there. So it is based on doctrine of necessity. It has problems with its constitution. They cannot even change the constitution without Turkish Cypriots, but also it's run by monocommunal government. Yeah. On the other hand, you have Turkish Cypriots breakaway state and causing another abnormality and states of exception in the north. And these two states of exception feed each other by use each other as a pretext to exist. So that's why it is very difficult to break this knob of states of exception, which forms the actual Cyprus problem.
Okay.
And
Well,
the international community should tackle that problem, I think, if you ask about the international community.
yeah. Well, to wrap up, I know we at Hasna will continue to focus on the issue, hopefully be in contact with you again soon.
Okay.
Yeah, follow us on social media, Hasna Inc., Twitter, Facebook. The same goes for the PRIO Cyprus Centre, as well as UniteCyprusNow. And as Kemal was saying, Island Talks FM for a trilingual podcast. With that, I just want to thank you all very much and hope that you stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.